Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. So, hello everyone. Today we are joined by Krukoff, and she is a yoga therapist and offers trainings at the Duke Integrative Medicine since 2007. She has written 5 books, one of which is Relax into Yoga for Seniors and Yoga Sparks. So welcome, Carol, and thank you for being here. I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you, Shira, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes. So let's just start. And I wanted to ask you about your yoga journey. So how did you get to yoga? When did it become yoga therapy? And how did it turn into a practice of teaching seniors?
Well, I'm happy to tell that story. I
Great.
never intended to be a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist. I'm kind of an accidental yoga therapist. My original career is in journalism. I was a reporter and editor at the Washington Post. And I started at the Washington Post back in the glory days of newspapers. It was right after Watergate. So Ben Bradley was my editor, the famous Ben Bradley. Katharine Graham was the publisher. Woodward and Bernstein were still there.
Wow.
I am so old that I started at the Washington Post when we used typewriters. So this is partly how I got into yoga. I was in my 20s. It was a fabulous experience to be in that newsroom and pushing to get stories on the front page. And I was wearing high heels and a power suit and, vying with other very talented people to get front page stories. And it was very stressful. So while it was a very exciting profession, it was also very stressful. The first year that I was there, the Washington Post converted from using typewriters to using computers. And in those early days of computers, there was very little ergonomic sensibility. So the computers were these little fixed boxes with a little fixed keyboard. And I developed excruciating neck pain from pounding out those stories on deadline. I was a runner at the time. I've always been physically active. And I thought, well, I'll try this yoga stuff. That's supposed to help with flexibility. That's supposed to help you become a little more peaceful. And my weekly yoga class became an oasis of calm in my life. My yoga journey in my 20s and 30s, I'd just go to a class once a week. And that class just helped me stay balanced, stay centered. I was not intending to be a yoga teacher, but in the year 2000, we moved from Washington to North Carolina. My husband's a cardiologist, and he got a great job at Duke. We moved in 1988, and there was a yoga teacher training. I discovered in the year 2000, there was a yoga teacher training that was being offered right down the road from me. And at that time, there were only a handful of yoga teacher trainings in the country, in the US. Now there's yoga teacher trainings everywhere. They boom. But back then there were not very many trainings. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to deepen my practice. And my first book was coming out. It was Healing Moves, How to Cure, Relieve, and Prevent Common Ailments, published by Random House. And I thought, well, it'd be a good credential for my book. So I decided to take this yoga teacher training. And it changed my life. It was a 2-year, 725-hour training.
Wow.
The teacher was an amazing woman named Esther Myers, who had a studio in Toronto. She'd come down to Durham for several long weekends over the course of those 2 years. We had lots of homework in between.
Great.
And as a requirement for that training, we had to do 12 hours of community service. Well, for my 12 hours of community service, I wasn't sure where I was going to teach. My husband was at the time head of the cardiac catheterization lab at the Durham Veterans Association hospital. And I thought, well, that might be interesting to teach veterans. And I found that there was a program at the Durham VA called the GeriFit program. It was a gerontology rehabilitation program where mostly men, there were a few women, but it was mostly men because they were veterans in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who had had some serious health issues. They had had bypass surgery, they were taking supplemental oxygen, they had joint replacements. These guys had a lot of health challenges.
Yeah.
So in this gerontology rehab program, they do aerobics. They had an aerobic program and they do strength training. So I thought, well, I'll come in and offer yoga once a week.
Yeah.
And see what that's like. Well, I walked into the room I was a brand new teacher in training doing my community service. I walked into the room with these older guys and I thought, I was terrified. I thought, I'm going to kill these guys. I cannot teach them sun salutations. This guy had bypass surgery 3 months ago. This guy is using supplement. What am I going to do? I was really floored.
Scared.
So I was totally scared. It was in a hospital. It was done in a hospital setting. There was a nurse in the room. I thought, whoo, at least I've got support. But I said, can I just watch what you're already doing?
Yeah,
said,
exactly.
Of course.
Yeah.
So I watched them do their floor exercises. And in their floor exercise program, they got down on all fours and they did something that they called hump and slump. Hump and
cat
slump.
cow.
Exactly. You got it. The light bulb went off in my head. I said, okay, they're already doing cat cow. So if I teach them cat cow, it probably isn't going to kill them because they're already doing it. And I saw that they were also doing bridge pose. They were doing Dandasana. They were doing locust pose.
Oh my goodness.
So there were many of the things that they were already doing in their calisthenics program that were yoga asanas. And I thought, well, I will add the rest of yoga. I will add the breath. I will add the awareness. I will add relaxation and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, instead of just volunteering for 12 weeks and leaving, which had been my intention, I volunteered there for 5 years because it was incredible. My students loved it. They would come back and tell me I could sleep. I slept better than I've slept in a long time. My doctor says my blood pressure is better. He's cutting back on my medication. I can get up and down the stairs much easier than I ever could. But it was really powerful.
Yeah, it's very rewarding
working with this group.
Yeah.
Very rewarding. They were so grateful. They felt better. They functioned better. And I thought, well, I need more training. I want to serve this population. So that's what started my journey.
Yeah.
That was the beginning.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so you're thrown right in. And I know this, I was interning at my teacher's. She was a yoga teacher, but she was also an Ayurvedic practitioner and a masseur. And she would just throw me in with her patients and get me to do sequences and things. But the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know much. and
so true.
Yeah. And then you're like kind of paralyzed to start teaching them things because so much can go wrong.
Well, remember, this was the early 2000s. This was almost 20 years ago. And yoga's come a long way since then. And I fortunately have had a lot more training since those early days. But much of the training was training that we created ourselves. So in 2007, Duke opened an integrative medicine facility. And I was asked to be a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist there.
Great.
And it was a beautiful building. My husband, Mitch, again, is a cardiologist, and we discussed this a lot about the importance of being safe with yoga. Because at the time, there was this feeling like yoga is about health. So how could you possibly get hurt doing yoga? But I know that the proper dosage and application is so important. So what we did with a colleague, Kimberly Carson, we created a program called the Integrative Yoga for Seniors Professional Training, where we invited Duke medical faculty experts in different conditions that are common among older adults, like heart disease is, of course, the #1 killer of older adults. So my husband, Mitch, came and talked to us about heart disease and what it is and what maybe the contraindications, some of the things we should and shouldn't do, like breath holding, which is very often done in yoga, can be inadvisable for people with hypertension. Nobody was talking about that at the time.
No.
We had a physical therapist, a PhD physical therapist, come talk to us about osteoporosis. Some of the very commonly taught yoga poses, forward bends with straight legs, can be very risky for people with low bone density. No one was talking about that at the time. You know, we were pioneers, and we got some pushback from people who said we were creating fear in the yoga community. But it's not about creating fear, it's about being responsible.
You want to make realistic. Sure, you know,
ahimsa, do no harm, is a value that's held highly both by yoga practitioners and by Western medicine. And as emerging yoga therapists trying to bring this practice into mainstream medicine, safety is a primary concern. So this program that we created in 2007, the Integrative Yoga for Seniors Professional Training, we do a master program at Duke annually. Of course, we couldn't do it last year because of COVID, but we're planning to do one next year. We've also created an online version. So we have many people around the world. We've graduated now more than 1,000 yoga teachers from, I think it's over 5 continents and 12 countries around the world. The online training is available out there. And of course, during the COVID year, that's attracted many people because, you know, we can't do in-person trainings, but that's been very, very helpful. I'm glad that we were able to do that because seniors, older adults, and of course, there's the question, well, what is a senior anyway? When I started doing this work, I was in my 40s and now I'm in my 60s. And for years, seniors was 5 years older than me. But now, you know, I'm a senior myself. I'm proud 67-year-old. And, you know, in this population, there's a lot of variety. There are some older adults who can run marathons, who are extremely fit. And there's some people in their 50s who can't get up out of a chair. So it's a very varied group. You've got a lot of abilities, but within that, there's still some precautions that by virtue of age alone, there are things that we need to be mindful of as yoga teachers and yoga therapists, vulnerabilities, such as spinal health. You know, many of these diseases of age, like osteoporosis, like heart disease, are silent diseases, which means people don't have symptoms. Very often, the first symptom of heart disease can be death. The first symptom of osteoporosis can be a broken bone. So we don't want to be the ones who've caused that.
No. Yeah, I agree. And I remember feeling that about 5 years ago, I was very afraid to teach. And I was like, I have to get more info, and not just from the yoga world, from all sorts of different professions and studies, to understand what these bodies in front of me can potentially fall into, or what can I create with the positions. So that's one thing I wanted to ask. What are some of the most misconceived ideas yoga teachers may have about older bodies?
Interesting question. What are the biggest misconceptions about older bodies? Well, that sometimes there is, you know, if someone is really fit, say a very fit older adult, you know, why shouldn't you teach that person a headstand? Or that an older adult just needs to maybe go a little bit slower, but with time and with practice, an older body may be able to do a shoulder stand, or may be able to do a headstand, or may be able to do some of these extreme party poses. I call them party poses. I used to do them. I don't do them anymore. And, you know, one of the main things that we teach teachers to ask themselves is why? Why am I teaching this? Why is it so important that this person stands on their head? Now, there may be an older adult, there may be a 70-year-old who's been standing on his head or her head all their life, since childhood. Great, wonderful, more power to them. I would not want to take away a headstand from that person. But if somebody who's never practiced yoga before and maybe is not very fit walks into your class in their senior years, why would you want to teach that person a headstand? Why would that be some kind of goal?
Yeah, what's the intention and the purpose?
Exactly. What's the intention? Why would you do that? Because by age alone, that person's cardiovascular system may be more likely to have weaknesses that might create a stroke, that might create, a potentially adverse event. So there's much more than asana. Yoga teachers tend to get so focused on the postures, the postures, the postures. In the older adult group, what our view has found is that why do people come to a yoga class? Why do they walk into a yoga class? Younger people may walk into a yoga class because they want a yoga body, they want a yoga butt, they want a yoga abs. In general, older people are, of course, they want to look good, but they're not so much looking for the yoga butt and the yoga ab. They want to feel better. They have pain that they want to relieve. They want to be able to do things. They want to be able to get down on the floor and play with their grandchildren. They want to be able to live independently. They're much more, in our experience, interested in function, in getting through daily life with ease, without pain, or with minimizing their pain, with being able to drive, with being able to get up and down from a chair. Much more interested in function. So I would encourage yoga teachers to ask their students, if they have older adults, why are you here? What do you want out of class? Maybe you want to sleep better, and rather than kind of encourage these challenging postures, and the person may want to do that, and that may be appropriate. But in general, people want to be able to feel and function better.
Yeah, to live well.
To live well, exactly. Exactly.
What are commonly taught postures and transitions that could be injurious for these older people?
Well, commonly taught, sure. So one of the biggest areas that is of concern is low bone density, called osteoporosis, and then low bone density before it becomes clinically osteoporosis. It's on a schema, and it's actually quite common. Depending on the population you're dealing with, if you're dealing with white women, which is a very big population that comes to yoga, white postmenopausal women, up to half can have a fracture at some point in their adult life. This is the US figures. So people might not realize that they have low bone density, but the longer someone lives, the more likely they are to have low bone density. And there are other conditions that, and not just women, but also men can have low bone density. Medications that people take, people who've been on steroids, corticosteroids for years for things like asthma, that can affect bone density. People who've been on SSRIs for depression and anxiety, that can cause low bone density. People who've had anorexia. There's lots of conditions that contribute to low bone density. So it's very, very common in later life. So we eliminate from our Relax into Yoga for Seniors canons of postures, we eliminate risky poses. The riskiest pose is loaded forward spinal flexion. So basically it's those forward bends with straight legs. And that's all over the yoga. If you do the sun salutation, I mean, how many times in my life, my younger life, have I, lift the kneecaps, swan dive forward. And of course, we're taught to hinge from the hips, but the reality is that many people's flexibility is such that they're really going to be rounding the back. They can't. They can't. So we have eliminated straight-legged forward bends. When you bend forward, bend your knees. If you go to a physical therapist, they're going to tell you anytime you bend to lift up a package or something, bend your knees, bend your knees. But somehow in the yoga world, that message hasn't gotten through.
Not yet. So I think it's coming.
I'm hoping so.
There's a lot of very good high teachers, like teachers who've been teaching a long time and have a big audience, that are now teaching the bend the knees. So I've been hearing it for a few years.
That's great. And one of the
Yeah.
reasons why is that we teachers are getting older ourselves,
Yeah,
and we're being diagnosed with these
exactly.
conditions
Or you
ourselves.
just
And
notice, yeah.
there's been a rash of yoga teachers in the last decade who are having hip replacements, in
Yes.
part because people who tend to be attracted to yoga and be able to do some of the extreme poses tend to be hypermobile.
Yep.
And these hypermobile teachers, like my friend Jill Miller, was very public about her hip
Yes,
replacement.
I heard
You know, all those years, just because you can do something
doesn't mean
like
you
an
should.
extreme, thank you for finishing the sentence. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Just because you can. Yeah.
I listened to a podcast from Jay Brown, and he was talking, I can't remember to who, but this man was, I think, a physiotherapist, and he said, it's like asking a horse to do the splits. Some of the things we're just not anatomically meant to be doing those things. So why should we do them repetitively every day and
Exactly.
assume we won't be doing damage to those joints?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, we've got to look too at our canon of yoga postures. And
Mm.
there's this myth somehow that these yoga postures are somehow sacred teachings from the ancients, when in fact many of these are only a couple
New.
hundred years old and
Yeah.
were taught during a time when there was sort of a calisthenics and a British culture of calisthenics that came to India, and they were taught to young boys to keep fit.
Exactly. Yeah, it's for men who were young. Apply that to an older woman, and it's already very different
Yeah.
story.
So the mountain pose, the way that I like to teach mountain pose, my teacher Esther Myers was an
Mm,
Iyengar teacher for many
mm,
years. Then she studied with Vonda Scaravelli, and
mm.
she broke from the Iyengar tradition of teaching mountain pose with feet together because she said that might be fine if you're a little Indian man with narrow little Indian hips. But she was a Western woman with big hips, and we teach mountain pose with feet hip distance apart.
Yeah, I do too.
So it's a much more functional.
Yeah.
So to go back to your original question, what are some of the dangerous poses in addition to flexion,
Forward
spinal
folds.
flexion with straight legs would be end range rotation. So
Which,
that means, which means twisting the spine as far as you possibly can is
oh,
inadvisable,
yes,
particularly when
definitely.
it's loaded. So what do we
Mm,
do in yoga? We're sitting down, which makes it a loaded position. When we're sitting, we don't have standing is
freedom.
less loaded. Lying down is the least loaded position. But when we're sitting, the force of gravity on the spine is much greater
Yeah.
than it is if we were standing. So in yoga, it's not uncommon to be sitting, to cross our legs, to twist as far as we can, and then hook our elbow behind our knee and twist even further. We don't do this with older adults
No.
because this can increase the risk of fracture.
Yes. Yes.
So those are kind of the two big areas. And the other big sort of
So
area within
it's mainly the spine that you're worried about, concerned about.
the spine is an area of great concern
Mm,
with low bone density because that's so common among older adults. With the cardiovascular system, we're concerned about extremes.
mm,
So extremes of inversion. So we
mm-hmm,
don't put the head below the heart.
mm-hmm.
Um, and let with there are exceptions. So in yoga therapy, it depends.
Yeah.
If this is someone who's been, so for example, me, I'm 67 years old. I have an artificial heart valve
Mm-hmm,
because I was born with a congenital abnormality called a bicuspid aortic valve.
mm-hmm,
It had to be replaced when I was 54. So I have a tissue valve and I had an aneurysm repaired. So here I am, a heart patient. I've
mm-hmm.
been practicing yoga all my life. I do downward dog in my personal practice. I've been doing it, all my adult life. I'm comfortable doing it. So it's not that someone with an artificial heart valve should never, ever do downward dog or do something that places the head below the heart. It's not something that I teach in
Mm.
my gentle yoga classes to someone who's never practiced yoga before, who's coming into my yoga classes. I don't do any head below the heart inversions. I
Mm-hmm.
also do not do breath holding, and I don't do breath holding personally. That was the one thing that my cardiologist, after I had my heart surgery and went through rehab and said, well, what advice do you have for me? What can't I do? Can I stand on my head? Can I blah, blah, blah? He said, the only thing I really want you not to do is to hold your breath while you're straining. That's called the Valsalva maneuver.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually something that people do very often in the weight room. You'll hear people when they're lifting heavy weights, they go,
Ah.
It's also something people do in daily life, for example, on the toilet when they're straining, holding your breath and straining. This puts a lot of pressure
Stress.
on the cardiovascular system. So I'm very careful. We don't teach any kind of breath holding. Breath holding and straining puts a lot of stress on the cardiovascular system.
Okay.
And within the older adult population, at least in the US, those are the statistics I'm most familiar with. More than half of people 65 and older have hypertension. So any kind of breath holding where you're instructing the person to hold their breath for a count of blah, 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 we don't do because this can affect the blood pressure. So the question is, why are you teaching this? We do teach a gentle retention after exhalation if it feels comfortable for the person, as long as the person isn't feeling like they're gasping for breath, might be okay. And we do outline all of this in our book.
So it's more like a natural, if it occurs naturally, to hold the breath. That's all right. No
at
forcing?
The end of the exhalation, not
only
at
the
the
exhalation.
End of the inhalation.
Okay.
So I do have a YouTube channel, and I have an audio called Breathing Lessons if you're interested in how I teach breathing. But what I like to do is just invite people to notice their breath, because many people just making that connection with the breath, just learning, isn't that interesting? I can notice my breath. Isn't that interesting? I'm holding my breath. I didn't realize that. When I'm concentrating, I'm holding. Just getting people familiar with their natural breath, and then maybe counting the length of the inhale and counting the length of their natural exhale, not telling them count to this or that, but notice your breath and then mentally count the length of your inhale and exhale. And if it feels comfortable, extend your exhalation, make it a little longer than your inhalation. So they're in charge. They're in charge of what they're doing and making sure that they're not forcing their breath, that the breath is flowing, keeping the breath flowing and comfortable. If I had to boil it down to one phrase, it would be that. Just keep the breath flowing and comfortable.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good reminder. And can I just ask, inversions, what does it do to the heart itself that it causes it to feel pressured? Is it just gravity?
Just the heart, it's gravity. So gravity can have a profound impact on the whole cardiovascular system. So think about even a young person. Have you ever gotten up suddenly from sitting down and felt lightheaded?
Always.
Yes. Yeah. So that is the effect of gravity on the cardiovascular system. So that's why it's really important when you're teaching older adults and you're shifting planes of action from lying down to sitting or sitting to standing to move slowly. Maybe have a chair nearby, because as we get older, the whole cardiovascular system gets a little stiffer and more leathery. So we see this on the outside of our body. We get wrinkles. We can see the effect of age on the outside of our body. It has an effect on the inside of our body too. And the blood vessels can tend to get a little bit more leathery. So they're not as resilient. So that's called postural hypotension. When you get up, suddenly and you feel dizzy, that hypotension is low blood pressure. It's that's the
opposite.
The blood hasn't quite gotten to your head yet. So when you go upside down, there is the potential in an older body that there may be aneurysms, there may be weaknesses in the blood vessels, there could be the potential for a stroke. So got to ask yourself, why? Why would I teach this? Why is it?
Well, this is important to know. Once you understand that, it's like, there's no way I'd teach to an older person. Yeah.
So does the benefit outweigh the risk?
No.
And again, if this is somebody who's been doing downward dog all their life and they love it, great. It might be perfectly fine. But why would you be teaching that? So maybe you want to lengthen the spine. Maybe you want to stretch the back of the legs. So might you be able to teach that get that same benefit. Instead of the person putting their hands on the floor, what if they put their hands on the wall, push back from the wall, and they get the benefit of lengthening the spine and stretching the legs without the risk of having the head below the heart? This is what we spend many hours teaching in our integrative yoga for seniors professional training. And online, I think it's called Teaching Yoga to Seniors, but people can just Google it if they're interested.
I'll put everything in the show notes, all the links.
Good.
Work.
Good.
And your trainings.
Yeah. Because what we do is we try to teach yoga teachers how to think about the risks and create safe options, because older adults can be very complicated. If you know, oh, well, this is the modification for a person with hypertension, fine. That modification may not be appropriate if the person also has osteoporosis. So you might find people tend to have comorbidities. They might have an artificial hip, and they might be on supplemental oxygen, and they might be a heart patient, and they might have osteoporosis. So where does that leave you? So learning how to think about, well, what are the risks and benefits of each individual practice, and how can I adapt it safely?
Well, I think the more important thing is understanding how it works, and then you can adapt.
Exactly.
Can we move over to what the yoga, the benefits of yoga are for these older people?
Well, similar to the benefits of yoga for people of all ages. So, wow, where do I start? I think improving function, the ability to function. Unfortunately, in our culture these days, most people are sedentary. And as people get older, they lose flexibility. And what the studies suggest is much of the loss of flexibility and much of the pain that comes from conditions like arthritis is not caused by the disease itself, but is caused by the inactivity, the lack of movement. So appropriate movement, moving all the joints through their full range of motion on a regular basis, can go a long way to relieving pain of common conditions like arthritis.
And can you explain to listeners why that is? What does movement actually do to the physiology that it benefits the whole body, mind?
Well, in a nutshell, it's kind of use it or lose it. I mean, our joints, our bones, our muscles really we're animals. We need to move our bodies to keep them comfortable. I mean, if you have a pet, you might notice that when your dog gets up from lying down, the first thing that dog does is stretch. And we don't tend to do this as humans, and we get very, very stiff. So functioning better, relieving pain, calming the mind, and connecting with that deepest, truest part of ourselves. So I'm a big fan of physical therapy. I've always done physical therapy anytime I've had a traumatic injury. That said, physical therapy just looks at the physical layer of the body, and yoga is a holistic practice. So in yoga, we recognize that physical ailments also have energetic components, emotional components, mental components, and spiritual components. So in the yoga practice, we look at all these many layers of being. As somebody who's been through heart surgery, I know that affects your energies, your emotions, the whole package. And in yoga, we have a toolkit that embraces all of this. So we at the heart of it, yoga is about union. It's about uniting the mind and the body through the breath. It's about uniting our individual selves with a sense of something greater, and about uniting all these disparate parts of ourselves into one unified whole. So yoga offers a complete toolkit that can be very, very helpful for people of all ages, but particularly for older adults. I mean, we're making that journey to our last breath. I mean, that's just the truth of things. The practice, yoga, recognizes, it's part of our tradition, the reality of impermanence. We're only here on this planet for
a very short time.
Yep. And nobody knows how long that time's going to be. And
Mm.
it might sound morbid, but actually, it's actually not so morbid because
Actually, very
it
beautiful.
makes it's actually very beautiful because it means this moment is so precious.
Every
So we can be
moment. Yeah.
grateful every moment. We can be grateful for the
Mm.
gift of breath.
Mm.
Um, so
Oh,
yeah,
that's
so
so beautiful.
yoga's
Thank you,
got a lot of
Carol.
power.
That was very
I'm glad to.
powerful.
Thank you, thanks, Shira. Thank you.
Yeah. So, what are safety tips? I think you've mentioned them. Um, and how does medicine affect the balance of older populations?
Medicines or medications that people take. Well,
Mm-hmm.
if people are taking, there was just a something I read in the newspaper about a new study that was showing that more older adults are taking more medications, and many of the medications that are commonly taken in later life can affect balance.
Yeah,
So
a lot of them.
regardless of what medications you're taking, if you're taking 4 or more medications, you're at higher risk for falls.
Mm.
And that's one of the questions I have on my intake form is how many medications are you taking? And it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessary that I know what they are. It's out of the scope of practice of a yoga therapist or a yoga teacher to know or ask about the medications, but it's within our scope of practice to know that if somebody's on 4 or more medications, they're at higher risk of falls.
Mm.
So when I teach older adults, we all have chairs.
Mm-hmm.
And the chairs are for seated poses. So I don't teach floor sitting, as I mentioned, for the reasons of most people are not able, even younger people are not able to sit on the floor and keep a neutral spine.
Yeah.
So it's going to put them at risk of fracture. People do spend a lot of time sitting, so they need to learn how to sit with good posture. So we sit in a chair with good posture, and we use the chair when we're standing as a support.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a balance pose, you might have something to hold on to. If you're feeling dizzy, so the dizziness can come, as we mentioned, from just postural hypotension, from that low blood pressure that we get when we stand up suddenly, but it can also come from the medications we're taking. It may come from dehydration. It's not
Mm.
uncommon for older adults to not want to drink enough because they don't want to have to go to the bathroom and interrupt the class. So they may be dehydrated, which can make people dizzy. So there's a lot, it's multifactorial, as
Yeah.
the doctors would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And how can yoga therapy help older people or seniors prevent fall?
Well, yoga therapy is the individual application of the toolkit of yoga to an individual's personal
Needs.
needs. So a yoga class can be great. However, in a yoga class, you're one of a number of people, and the class is not necessarily going to be targeted just to you. Yoga therapy is a one-on-one situation where the yoga therapist is really working with you and your needs and your issues, your goals, your desires. And balance is something that can be strengthened with practice. So balance involves a lot of parts of our body. It involves our muscles and our bones and our joints. It involves our brain and our proprioceptive senses.
Mm.
So the balance poses that we learn in the yoga practice can be very helpful in our daily life. If we were to be walking along and we would stumble, for example, if we have been practicing yoga, our proprioceptive senses may be able to keep us upright. And whereas if we hadn't had this training, we might fall. So
Mm.
it can be a very useful skill. You can improve your balance and strengthen your balance
Mm-hmm.
with practice.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it has a lot to do with just awareness as well? And so you're faster to
Awareness is a
feel?
big part of it.
Yeah.
Awareness is always a big part of it. Very often uh, our minds are someplace else. Our bodies may be one place and we're somewhere else in our minds. The yoga practice helps us connect our mind and body to be present and
Mm.
to notice and
Mm.
to be aware. So awareness is a key part of the yoga practice.
Mm-hmm.
And very often in our culture, people tend to live from the neck up. They
Yes.
live in their head.
Yes,
They
even
don't,
children.
even children,
Yeah.
it's yoga practice helps take us out of our heads and into our bodies. So we
Mm-hmm.
notice what's going on. In
Mm-hmm.
our culture, very often, and our bodies have to be in big pain for us to even notice it. But the yoga practice can help us become more aware of the more subtle signals, because sometimes ailments have precursors. There may be just a
Most of the
twinge or
time.
something, and most people might ignore it. But if you're a yoga practitioner, you go, what is that about? Well, I'm going to pay
Mm.
attention to that. And perhaps that tweak does not flare. I know that as I've gotten up in age, my hips will let me know if I don't do my practice regularly. I'll start feeling that catch in my hip, where if I'm practicing regularly, I don't feel it. So it's
Mm.
that my body telling me, okay, get back on your mat, Carol. 2 days have passed and you haven't done your lunges. Get back to it.
Yeah, so true. I know that as well. Okay, thank you. So would you like to do a practice, or is there anything else you want to share still with the listeners that you feel we haven't touched on?
Well, thank you, Shira, for this is a lovely opportunity. And yes, the practice I'd like to share with you today is a practice of, I call it chair stand.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to move to my chair
Yeah.
so I can talk you through it. So we spend a lot of time sitting, most of us, and many of us do not sit with good posture. So if you're listening to me at the moment, I would invite you just for a moment to freeze. Just don't move. Keep breathing. Please keep breathing. But just notice how you're sitting. You might be standing as you're listening, so that's okay too. But if you're sitting, notice what you're sitting on. Okay, you're sitting on your chair, but what part of your anatomy are you sitting on? For many of us, we might be sitting on our sacrums. Now, that sacrum is that triangular bone at the base of the spine. That's not really meant for sitting. So let's find our sit bone. So shamelessly reach under your bottom. Move the flesh away. You might feel these two knobs at the base of the pelvis. Those are your sit bones. So I would invite you to sit on those two knobs and then pat yourself on the top of the head. I know it looks very silly. Pat, 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 pat. And then let your hand rest. So notice that spot on the top of your head where you feel where you were tapping. That's the crown of the head. So see what it would be like to lift up from the crown of the head and at the same time root down through the sit bones. Have your legs about hip distance apart. And if you can sit sort of forward in the chair, that would be useful. So this is called seated mountain pose. So if somebody was looking at you from the side, they'd see your ear over your shoulder and your shoulder over your hips. Let your shoulders be relaxed and feel the breath moving in your body. See if you can feel the breath filling your lungs on the inhale, and then easy inhale and exhale. Just feel the movement of breath in the body, nice and easy. Now, one of the main reasons why people wind up in nursing homes is that they're not able to get up themselves from a seated position. So, what we're going to practice is called chair stand, which strengthens the muscles that we need to be able to stand up on our own power, stand up and sit down again from a chair. So again, connecting with the breath. On the inhale, sit as tall as you can. And on the exhalation, hinge forward from the hips. So the hip joint is right where the crease is, where the leg meets the torso. And then just let your breath relax, let all that get calm. You might even put your pinky in a crease where the leg and the torso meet. So we'll do that again. Inhale, sit tall. Exhale, hinge from the hips. You might feel your pinky kind of grab. Press your legs into the ground, but don't come to standing. Then just relax the breath and go back to sitting again. So for some of us, this might be enough. Just inhale, sit tall. Exhale, hinge from the hips. Activate the legs, press the legs into the ground, and then just relax the body, relax the breath. So that's the as if I was going to stand. So somebody who maybe is in a wheelchair, not able to stand today, might do this practice. For those of us who are interested and able to stand, I would invite you to inhale, sit tall, exhale, hinge from the hips, activate your legs, use the strength of the legs, come to standing. Beautiful. And then to sit again, bend your knees, stick your bottom way back, float your arms forward, slowly lower your bottom into the chair. Beautiful. This is chair stand. We'll do that again. Inhale, get tall. Exhale, hinge from the hips. Use the strength of your legs, come to standing. To sit again, stick your bottom way back as you bend your knees and float your arms forward. Slowly lower your bottom down into the chair. The slower you go, the more challenging it is. And then continue this a few times at your own pace, standing and sitting. And over time, you might find that this becomes a little bit easier to do. I've had students tell me that they were not able to do this without pushing against something when they first started, and now they can stand and sit without using their arms, which is a big benefit. And the next time you're sitting, just sit again for a moment. If you want to see this on video, you can look on YouTube. I made a chair stand video with Duke. Probably if you put my name in and Duke, you'll find the chair stand video. There's also there's a metric that's used to gauge the health of older adults called the 30-second chair stand test. And you can test yourself. How many times can you stand comfortably in 30 seconds? That can be correlated to your health status. So this has a real practical application as well. So thank you for allowing me to share that with everyone, Shira.
Yes, thank you for sharing. It's amazing how something so simple that you do 1,000,000 times a day can be such a beautiful practice.
And when you watch older adults get up from a chair, some people are not so simple and beautiful, but they can be, hopefully, with some practice.
Yeah. I can imagine that because you're pushing with your feet, you're already building the strength, even when you don't lift up. So, yeah. Thank you. Okay, Carol, is there something else you would like to share? Anything else you feel that hasn't been said?
No, you are very thorough, and I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to share my passion for making the yoga practice appropriate and available to older adults. I'm glad you'll have in the show notes our website, Yoga for Seniors, and my website, Healing Moves. And again, we have a book available for older adults. It comes with 12 downloadable audio practices. So, people can do this on their own. If they have the help of a professional, of course, that's always a benefit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So have a wonderful week still for you. And we'll say goodbye to our listeners.
I appreciate the opportunity. Take care. Be well.
Thank you for being here. So thank you everyone for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and you'll be hearing from me next week.